Imagine this for a second. Your city, your home, is completely surrounded by the most powerful army in the world. The food is almost gone, and fear, well, fear is absolutely everywhere. That's the terrifying reality for the people of Jerusalem. So in this moment of just sheer desperation, King Zedekiah sends a message to the prophet Jeremiah. And his question is pretty simple. Is God going to save us? Is he going to do one of his wondrous works and just make this whole nightmare disappear? I mean, everything is hanging on this one answer. And that's where we're jumping in today, into one of the most intense and pivotal sections of the entire book of Jeremiah. Chapters 21 through 25, they contain the final unfiltered prophecies to Judah right before it all comes crashing down. This is truly the point of no return. So here's how we're going to break this down chapter by chapter to see how this incredible story plays out. We're going to start with a start choice facing the city under siege. Then we'll look at the failure of its leaders, uncover an amazing promise of a future king, see how God separates the hopeful from the hopeless, and finally get a really specific timeline for judgment and restoration. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so let's dive right into chapter 21. It kicks off with that desperate plea from King Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar and the whole Babylonian army are literally at the gates. The king, he wants Jeremiah to ask God for a miracle, right? A divine intervention to save them. He's hoping for a message of deliverance. Spoilers, he is not going to get one. This is, and I'm not exaggerating, one of the most shocking reversals you will find anywhere. The king asks for God's help, and God's response through Jeremiah is basically, no. Actually, I'm your enemy in this fight. I myself will fight against you with an outstretched hand and a strong arm, in anger and in fury and in great wrath. Wow. The protector has become the adversary. So then God lays out this choice for the people, and it's completely counterintuitive. The path to life isn't to fight harder, it's just surrender. He says, look, if you stay in the city, you will die, but if you walk out and surrender to the Babylonians, you will live. It's a radical, radical call to just abandon all national pride and trust a really strange-looking plan for salvation. So you have to ask, why? Why is all of this happening? Well, God makes it crystal clear. It's because of a complete and total failure of justice. This message is aimed right at the house of the king of Judah. Their main job was to execute judgment, to deliver the oppressed, but they did the exact opposite. So this judgment, it isn't random. It's the direct result of their injustice. And that brings us to chapter 22, which zooms in with laser focus on the root of the problem, the corrupt kings of Judah. This isn't just some political commentary. You have to see this as a divine lawsuit against the entire royal family for abandoning their sacred duty. God basically reminds them of the royal job description. And look at this list. It's not about building fancy palaces or winning a bunch of wars. The core of righteous leadership is about justice and protecting the most vulnerable people in your society, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow. That was their mandate, plain and simple. And man, the consequences of their failure are spelled out here in some brutal detail. Jeremiah delivers these specific, damning verdicts against the last three kings. For Shallum, it's permanent exile. For Jehoiakim, who built his palace with injustice, it's the disgrace of being buried like a dead donkey, just dragged outside the city and dumped. And for Coniah, even if he were as precious as a king's own signet ring, God says he would rip him off his finger and throw him away. The imagery is just brutal and absolutely unforgettable. Okay, so after 2 chapters of just relentless, heavy judgment, chapter 23 takes this dramatic turn. Because out of the ashes of all this failed leadership, God makes one of the most powerful promises in the entire Old Testament. He contrasts these corrupt leaders, the shepherds, with the promise of a true king. The chapter opens with a woe to these false shepherds, the kings and the prophets who have destroyed and scattered God's flock. See, they were speaking their own ideas, not God's word, telling people, oh, you'll have peace, when destruction was right around the corner. But God promises to step in. He says he will gather the remnant of his flock and set up true shepherds who will actually care for them. And here it is, the ultimate solution. God promises to raise up for David a righteous branch. Now, this isn't just another king in the family line. This is the king. This is the one who will finally fulfill that royal mandate to bring true judgment and justice to the earth. This is the great messianic hope, the perfect leader rising from the fallen dynasty of David. And the climax of it all is his name,
What is this king going to be called? Yahweh Tzidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. The name itself is the whole message. The righteousness that the people and their kings could never, ever achieve on their own will be embodied in this coming king. He is their righteousness.
So we have this incredible promise of hope. But who's it for exactly? Well, chapter 24 gives us this strange and really powerful vision to answer that very question. Jeremiah sees 2 baskets of figs sitting in front of the temple. One basket is full of really good figs, and the other is full of very bad figs. And once again, the meaning is completely the opposite of what you'd expect. The good figs, God says, are the people who have already been taken into exile in Babylon, the ones who seem to have lost everything. God says he sent them there for their good and promises to give them a new heart and bring them back. And the bad figs? That's King Zedekiah and everyone who's left behind in Jerusalem. They are the ones destined for a curse and for destruction. It shows us that God's discipline, the exile itself, is actually the pathway to hope and restoration.
All right, our final chapter in this section, chapter 25, is like the camera pulling way back to give us the wide historical view. It gives us a specific timeline for the judgment that's been building up for decades. And this prophecy is given in a super important year, the very first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, the year the instrument of God's judgment finally comes to power. Jeremiah reminds the people that for 23 long years, from the reign of good King Josiah all the way to this moment, God has been speaking to them. He's been, as the text says, rising early and speaking, but they just haven't listened. This timeline shows us that God's judgment isn't rash. It's the patient, inevitable result of decades and decades of ignored warnings. And then we get the famous number 70. The entire land will be a desolation, and the people will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Now, the key insight here is that while the judgment is total, it is also temporary. It has a defined end date. This number, 70, it becomes a beacon of hope for future generations, a promise that the exile will not last forever. The chapter ends with this terrifying image of the cup of wrath. God tells Jeremiah to take this cup and make all the nations drink from it. And guess who's first on the list? Jerusalem and the cities of Judah. God's judgment begins with his own house, but it definitely doesn't end there. It's going to sweep through Egypt, Philistia, and all the surrounding kingdoms, proving that no one is exempt from divine justice.
So, as we pull all these 5 chapters together, what do we see? We see a powerful, interwoven story of judgment, hope, and leadership. It's a story about consequences and promises, all unfolding on this truly epic scale.
So, what are the big takeaways from all this? First, God's judgment isn't just random. It's a direct response to deep-seated injustice and rebellion. Second, we get a crystal clear definition of what good leadership looks like, caring for the weak. Third, we learn that even in the harshest discipline, like exile, there is a path to restoration and hope. God is always working to preserve a faithful remnant. And finally, the role of a true prophet is to speak God's difficult truth, not just the popular lies people want to hear. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. These chapters force us to ask a really tough question. In a world that is broken by injustice, when consequences aren't just possible but necessary, what does real hope even look like? Jeremiah suggests it doesn't look like avoiding the consequences, but finding God's purpose right in the middle of them, in the exile, in the discipline, and ultimately, in the promise of a truly righteous